Welcome to Dark Sleuth Secrets, where today's special is a macabre trip to late 19th century Austin, Texas. Picture this, a city teetering on the edge of modernity, all while hosting a shadowy, murderous guest. We're not just talking about any old villain, but the infamous Servant Girl Annihilator, America's first brush with the horrors of a serial killer. From 1884 to 1885, this phantom menace turned Austin into his personal horror show. It's a story peppered with a blend of horror and historical incompetence that's sure to tickle your dark, funny bone. In this episode, we'll dissect this twisted tale, not just as a series of ghastly murders, but as a puzzle so complex it made the city's collective head spin. Who was this mysterious killer? And why were they so intent on turning Austin into their personal horror show? And why, after so many years, do these unsolved crimes still cast a creepy, unsettling shadow over the city? Join us on a grim stroll down the cobblestone streets and gaslit alleys of historic Austin. We're piecing together the story of one of America's most elusive, and let's face it, probably overworked serial killers. Spoiler alert, the answers may surprise or possibly even amuse you in a dark sort of way. Imagine Austin in the late 1800s, a city buzzing with the promise of progress, yet wrestling with the challenges of post-Civil War reconstruction. It was a melting pot of social and racial tensions, where the law was more of a suggestion and crime-solving was a game of blind man's bluff. This was the perfect playground for our main character, the Servant Girl Annihilator. Choosing victims from the servant class, this shadowy figure was like a ghost, with the local law enforcement playing the role of the bumbling sidekick, always 2 steps behind. Our grim and somewhat twisted narrative kicks off in the year 1884 with Molly Smith, whose untimely end was not for the faint of heart. Picture this. Molly, a servant, was found in such a state that even the local coroner might have needed a stiff drink afterward. Her demise set the stage for what would become a string of 8 brutal killings, transforming Austin's very own horror series, and not the kind you'd binge watch with popcorn. The Annihilator, perhaps aiming for infamy or just really committed to their ghastly hobby, didn't stop at Molly. Oh no. This was just the opening act. Next up was Eliza Shelley, whose end was as horrific as Molly's. As the year progressed, 6 more victims would fall prey to this shadowy figure, each meeting their fate in a manner that was both chillingly unique and grotesquely consistent. You see, our killer had a flair for the dramatic, leaving behind scenes that would make even the goriest of splatter films seem tame. As if on a gruesome schedule, Irene Cross and others met similar fates. Attacked with what seemed like the killer's signature cocktail of brutality, an axe for the main course and a sharp object for dessert. The killer was nothing, if not consistent in their methods, leaving the city's residents wondering if their homes were safe havens or potential crime scenes. Then came the demise of Gracie Vance and her boyfriend. Talk about a date night gone wrong. They, along with the remaining victims, were found in states that screamed overkill. But with a twist. It seemed our mystery assailant had a thing for outdoor settings, dragging the bodies out of the house before turning them into macabre art pieces. These were not just killings, they were statements. Each murder was like a brushstroke in a very dark, very bloody painting. The killer was crafting a narrative of terror, with each victim adding to the chilling storyline. By the end of 1885, 8 lives had been cruelly snatched away, leaving a permanent scar on the city's history. The pattern of the killings. This is where our shadowy friend, the Annihilator, really starts to show off their, let's say, unique hobbies. Initially, he seemed to have a specific taste in victims with a grim fixation on African-American women in the servant class. It was like he was trying to make some sort of twisted societal statement, or maybe he just had a really specific type. But then, on a sinister Christmas Eve, the Annihilator decided to diversify his portfolio of terror. In a chilling shift of tactics, he targeted 2 white women, Susan Hancock and Eula Phillips. This was more than just a macabre twist. It was a nightmarish escalation. Both women were brutally attacked in their homes, their endings as tragic as they were violent. Susan Hancock was found unconscious in her bed, her head severely wounded. Later, just a few blocks away, Eula Phillips was discovered in a similarly horrific state, brutally attacked and left in her backyard. These murders were not just a departure in the choice of victims. They were a grotesque demonstration of the killer's audacity and cruelty. Attacking 2 women in one night, The Annihilator turned a festive evening into a tableau of horror, sending shockwaves through the city. The city was buzzing, not with the usual sounds of life, but with a growing fear of the unknown. Who was this phantom striking in the dead of night? And why did he seem to have a vendetta against this specific group of women? These questions plagued the minds of Austin's residents as they locked their doors and windows, hoping they wouldn't be the next exhibit in the Annihilator's gallery of horrors. It was this pattern, the choice of victims, the timing, the sheer brutality, that really got under the skin of the people of Austin. It wasn't just the murders themselves that were terrifying. It was the realization that this kind of evil was lurking among them, an unseen predator in their midst. The randomness and savagery of the attacks were like psychological warfare, leaving the city in a perpetual state of unease and dread. Austin turned into a city of insomniacs, with people barricading their homes and forming vigilante groups. It was like a block party, but with more guns and less trust in the neighbors. In response to the Annihilator's macabre spree, Austin transformed into something resembling a sleep-deprived, paranoid version of itself. The city, usually buzzing with the sounds of progress, now echoed with the clicks of locks and the creaks of floorboards under the watchful, wide-awake eyes of its residents. The locals, armed with a healthy dose of fear and a sprinkle of hysteria, took home security to a level that would make a doomsday prepper nod in approval. Doors weren't just locked, they were barricaded as if preparing for a zombie apocalypse. Windows were boarded up, creating the perfect ambiance for a ghost town in the making. And let's talk about the vigilante groups that popped up. Imagine your average neighborhood watch, but instead of binoculars and flashlights, these folks were armed to the teeth. It was like the Wild West had made a comeback, but instead of outlaws and sheriffs, you had scared citizens patrolling the streets, itching for a showdown with the elusive phantom killer. Sleep was as rare as a quiet night. Families huddled together, creating makeshift sleeping areas that resembled slumber party fortresses. Every creak and groan of the old houses was a potential harbinger of doom, turning the simplest night noises into heart-pounding moments of terror. Trust in neighbors dwindled faster than the supply of coffee and candles. Side-eyes were given at the slightest odd behavior, and the rumor mill worked overtime, churning out theories that ranged from plausible to the kind of ideas that would give conspiracy theorists a run for their money. As for the local media, they had a field day. Newspapers were filled with sensational headlines and lurid details of the murders, stoking the fires of fear and fascination. The Annihilator might as well have been a ghost story come to life, complete with all the trimmings of a classic horror tale. The impact of these events went beyond the immediate terror. They left a lasting imprint on the city's psyche. The Annihilator's reign of terror had turned Austin into a city on edge, a community united by fear and bound by a shared nightmare that seemed to have no end. The Austin police, bless their hearts, tried their best with what they had, which, let's face it, wasn't much. Forensic science was more fiction than fact, and their investigative methods were as effective as using a spoon to dig a grave. Oh, the investigation efforts. Here's where our story takes a turn into the realm of almost comical ineptitude. The Austin police, bless their well-meaning but utterly outmatched souls, embarked on a quest that would have made Don Quixote's endeavors look like a well-planned mission. Picture this. A police force armed with little more than their wits, which were sometimes questionable, and the investigative technology of the time, which was about as advanced as using a candle to search for a needle in a haystack at midnight. Forensic science? More like forensic guesswork. Fingerprints were basically exotic artwork, and DNA was just 3 letters in the alphabet. Their methods of investigation were akin to throwing darts blindfolded and hoping to hit the bullseye. Interrogations likely involved stern looks, and perhaps an accusatory finger-wagging, and collecting evidence seemed to be a matter of picking up whatever wasn't nailed down at the crime scene and pondering over it with a furrowed brow. Leads? Oh, they chased them all right. Like a dog chasing its own tail. Suspects were rounded up with the kind of logic that would make a conspiracy theorist seem rational. From local troublemakers to the odd out-of-towner who looked a bit shifty, no stone was left unturned, even if turning those stones made little to no sense. One particularly notable episode in this chaotic investigation was the trial of James Phillips for the murder of his wife, Eula Phillips, one of the Annihilator's victims. In a desperate bid for closure, the authorities put Phillips on trial, despite a glaring lack of evidence. The trial took a bizarre turn when they had Phillips place his foot over a replica of a footprint left behind at one of the crime scenes by the killer. It was a scene straight out of a far-fetched detective novel, except it was real and tragically inept. Philip's foot was significantly smaller than the footprint, yet in a bewildering move, the jury found him guilty. It seemed as though rationality had taken a back seat in the frenzied rush for justice. However, this shocking verdict was short-lived. A judge, likely appalled by the glaring miscarriage of justice, overturned the sentence and ordered a new trial. In this subsequent trial, the state dropped the case against Phillips, probably realizing the absurdity of their initial decision. This episode was a stark example of the era's rudimentary investigative methods and the public's desperation for answers, even at the cost of fairness and logic. Communication between departments was as streamlined as sending messages via carrier pigeon. Jurisdictional issues? They had those in spades. It was a case of the right hand not knowing what the left hand was doing, and both hands being tied behind their backs for good measure. In a particularly desperate move, there was even talk of bringing in bloodhounds from England. Yes, because what this investigation needed was some jet-lagged dogs to sniff around the crime scenes, which by then were as cold as the proverbial dead. Through all this, the killer remained as elusive as a ghost, likely watching the chaos unfold with the kind of amusement reserved for cats watching humans search for the TV remote. In the end, the police efforts, though earnest, were about as effective as trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half from a different box. This chapter in the whole saga is testament to the times, a period when law enforcement was still finding its feet in a world where the bad guys were often 1, 2, or even 3 steps ahead. The Annihilator's case was a puzzle wrapped in an enigma, tied up with a ribbon of 19th century confusion and ineptitude. Oh, and the theories and speculations surrounding the Annihilator were like a buffet of wild guesses and imaginative leaps, each more bizarre and entertaining than the last. It seems everyone in Austin had their own pet theory, ranging from somewhat plausible to the kind of ideas that make you wonder what's in the water supply. First up is the popular skilled butcher or surgeon theory. This one had legs, mainly because our villain's handiwork was a bit too precise for your average Joe with a grudge. The meticulousness of the mutilation suggested someone who knew their way around a scalpel or cleaver, or maybe just someone who was really into anatomy as a hobby. Then there was the theory that Jack the Ripper, bored of the foggy streets of London, decided to take a murderous road trip to Texas. Why? Maybe he wanted a change of scenery, or perhaps he was after some good old Texas barbecue. This theory had a dash of international intrigue, though it was probably cooked up by someone who just wanted to add a bit of extra spice to the story. Let's not forget the supernatural theories, because in the 1800s, if something was too bizarre or horrific to explain, why not blame it on a demon or an evil spirit? These theories turned the Annihilator into a boogeyman figure, the kind of entity that parents might use to scare their kids into behaving. Eat your vegetables, or the Annihilator will get you. There were also whispers of a secret society or a cult, because nothing says murder mystery like throwing in a dash of clandestine group activities. This theory painted the killings as ritualistic, which admittedly added a certain dramatic flair to the whole ordeal. Another favorite was the multiple killers theory, suggesting a tag team of terror. Perhaps the Annihilator had an apprentice, or maybe it was a group project gone horribly wrong. This theory gave the murders a whodunit vibe, with a twist of who else done it. Among the more grounded theories were those pointing to local outcasts, or known criminals, because sometimes the simplest explanation is the least exciting. But in a story filled with so much drama and suspense, why settle for simple? In the whirlwind of speculation, one thing was clear. The people of Austin had a flair for the dramatic, and the Annihilator had become as much a legend as a real-life menace. The truth, elusive as it was, had become entangled in a web of theories, each more colorful and imaginative than the last. The Annihilator was not just a killer. He had become the star of his own dark, twisted folklore, immortalized in the whispers and rumors that echoed through the streets of Austin. In the grand buffet of modern-day theories, scholars and authors have added their own gourmet dishes. Take Skip Hollandsworth, for instance, in his book, The Midnight Assassin. He throws a curveball, speculating that our killer might have been the son-in-law of Dr. James Given, head of the Texas Lunatic Asylum. The plot thickens with a twist worthy of a soap opera. The murders mysteriously ceased when this son-in-law was involuntarily committed. Coincidence? Or maybe just a really extreme way to avoid family gatherings? Then there's the theory about a Malaysian cook who apparently had a knack for being in the wrong place at the right time. He worked near some of the murder scenes and, in a move that screams suspicious, told his employers he was heading off to London, possibly to swap recipes with Jack the Ripper, or so the theory goes. Shirley Harrison, in her 2003 book, Jack the Ripper: The American Connection, throws another name into the hat. She points the finger at James Maybrick, a Liverpool cotton merchant, and a suspect in the Jack the Ripper case. According to her, Maybrick, who might have penned a confessional journal as Jack, was a frequent traveler to the American South. So, was he moonlighting as the Servant Girl Annihilator during his American holidays? It's the kind of twist that would make even a seasoned novelist raise an eyebrow. Not to be outdone, History Detectives, a PBS TV show, served up their own theory. They spotlight an Austin cook named Nathan Elgin, who sported a club foot with a missing toe, a peculiar detail that might explain some odd footprints found at some of the crime scenes. And in a finale fitting for a crime drama, the killing stopped when Elgin was shot dead by deputies during an assault on another woman. It's like the universe decided to write its own script for a dramatic end to the Annihilator's reign. Each theory adds a layer of intrigue to the case, turning the story of the Servant Girl Annihilator into a smorgasbord of speculation and mystery. Was it a family member with a dark secret, a cook with a sinister plan, a globe-trotting cotton merchant with a double life, or a local with a distinctive footprint? The theories are as varied as they are imaginative, painting a picture of a mystery that continues to captivate and confound. In the end, the Annihilator remains an enigmatic figure, a specter that looms over history's pages, daring us to solve a puzzle that has been scrambled by time and obscured by a myriad of theories. It's a story that tickles the darker corners of our curiosity, leaving us to wonder about the true identity of one of America's earliest and most elusive serial killers. As our dark journey ends, the Servant Girl Annihilator remains an enigma wrapped in a bloody mystery. It's a tale that highlights the dark side of human nature and the infancy of crime solving. It's a story that leaves us with more questions than answers, a chilling reminder of the monsters that can lurk in the shadows of history. We leave you with this thought: who was the Servant Girl Annihilator? Share your theories, however outlandish, in the comments. And remember, subscribing to Dark Sleuth Secrets is the best way to ensure you never miss out on our macabre history lessons. Stay curious and keep digging into the dark corners of the past.